Hello, everybody. I am Anthony Davis, and we are extremely excited for you all to be here. We have a very, very special session. We have Michael from YC. He's a partner with YC, and he's going to be answering all of the questions you might have about working at a startup or starting your own startup company. So, without further ado, let's welcome Michael to the stage. Okay. Michael, thanks for being here today. Just want to give students a little background on how this particular session will work. I know they've probably set in a few other sessions, okay? So guys, this is going to be a very, very interactive session. So as you all can see in the chat, you're going to have a Q&A button. We're asking that if you have questions about anything regarding starting a company or working at a startup, ask your question there. Michael's going to be reading those questions, but more importantly, he's going to be asking students to come on stage and have conversation. We want it to be very, very interactive, have conversation. So make sure your camera is ready. Make sure that you're ready to be on camera and or on screen. So Michael, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Really excited to be here. I think that for quick background, I graduated from school in '05. I started a company called Justin TV with three of my friends. It became a company called Twitch, which sold to Amazon. And then I've been working at Y Combinator for about 11 years. YC is a startup accelerator. And I've funded a little less than 1,000 companies during those 11 years. Um, The reason why I'm really excited today is that I started my journey when I was fairly close to y'all's ages. So I was 1 year out of school. I was 23 years old. And I think this is a very interesting time to start a company as a young person. But I think that there are a lot of misconceptions. I think there's a lot of what I would call pop startup knowledge, stuff that's just not true that students pick up. And so, what I'd really like to do today is see a bunch of your questions and really get into conversations around how someone actually goes through the process of getting a company started and how you would go from being a student or being an intern or being in your first job post college. How would you go from that point to actually doing a startup and getting into YC if that's something you're interested in? Um, to be clear, to kind of set some ground rules here, the only startups I'm really talking about here are software companies. Um, and software companies specifically that have a goal to raise money and to try to be big. I think that a lot of students are pretty confused around the VC world, often because VCs tend to tell people, "Hey, like, come, we will fund any kind of business," and that's a lie. VCs only want to fund founders who are excited to build very large businesses. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'm here to answer a bunch of questions. All right, with that, if you want to ask me questions, you should use the Q&A feature. I'm looking through this right now. You can also upvote questions that have already been asked. Great. Ibrahim looks like he's got a question here. Can we bring him up on stage to ask it? Let's see how this goes. Ibrahim, I hope you got your camera rolling. All right, there he is. Go ahead and ask. You can turn your microphone on and
Yeah, I'm trying to start my question was, like it says, how to move from creating projects, like starting your own,
I don't think you're talking into your microphone, sir. Just a note for future folks, have your shit squared away here so that you can do a good job on this.
Can you hear me?
No. All right. I'm going to read Ibrahim's question aloud. How do you move from creating projects to starting your own startup and or making one of those projects your startup? Um, First, I would say that a lot of great startups started as projects. Specifically, great startups can start as projects where you're solving your own problem. Maybe one of the most, or two of the most famous ones are Google and Facebook, which both started from founders solving personal problems. One was searching the internet, the other one was hanging out with friends in school. I think that what most founders screw up in this process is they believe that the project that they need to kind of turn into their startup has to already be working. So they're in this kind of weird state where they're working in a bunch of side projects and they think, oh, the one that works, I will turn into a startup. And I'll tell you that it is rare that small projects actually work. So the actual algorithm you should be looking at when trying to figure out which of your small projects to turn into a startup is one, like which solves your own problem. Like, have you been able to solve a problem for yourself? And if you have a small side project that you're actually using and enjoy using, that's a really great sign that you should be perhaps turning into a startup. Then I would say the second one is, what do you have fun doing? I think that too many founders or potential founders think first, how can I explain why this is a good business? As opposed to thinking, am I enjoying this? Am I enjoy working with this in this problem area? Am I enjoying building in this area? Am I enjoying giving users my product? If you're having fun, that's a really good sign you're going to do a good job and stick with it for a long time. If you're thinking like an MBA and trying to figure out like what's going to work as opposed to like what you enjoy and what you're going to personally use, you're not really using your superpowers. All right, next question. Nuria has got a question. Can we bring her up? All right. Ooh. Nuria, is she there? There she comes. Okay. I can't hear you. Can you turn your mic on? Uh-oh. No audio. Okay. Okay. Well,
Hello.
there she goes. Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. It's kind of like complicated and it's my first time using this technology and this tooling. But thanks, Michael. So yeah, I think the question that I put in the chat was what sort of projects thrive at Y Combinator? And I think one of the issues with startups sometimes is that you think that your idea needs to be revolutionary, or that needs to be something crazy. And I guess I'm wondering, is it better to just have like a good execution or a good idea on something that already sort of exists, or would you just say try to go for something super unique?
Okay. So I have two answers to that question. First, I think that if I were you trying to answer this question, what I would do is I would look at the YC website and I would research the successful companies. I think one of the things that is really tricky is that a lot of times people ask a YC partner a question that can be said as like, summarize everything that works for the winning companies. And like, in effect, it's almost like, do all the research for me and produce like a nice one pager that I can like learn from. And I would argue that in a lot of subjects, that's really possible. Like, I think in physics, like that can be done. I think when trying to teach someone math, that can be done. I think the tricky thing about startups is that imagine if the rules of physics were changing every year. How would someone kind of summarize it in a nice, easy to learn way? So what I find is that the founders who actually win are the ones who are willing to kind of do the primary research. And it's really interesting when you find someone who does primary research, because it turns out so much information is available about winning companies if you look, but you're not going to stumble on it. You have to actually look. So that's the first thing I'll say to you. The second thing I will say is, what always surprises me is how much a startup has to fight, maim, and kill an existing player to win. I think there's this misconception that there's all this green space in the world and there are new problems all the time. And like a new startup can come and solve a new problem. And in my experience, that's just not true. In my experience, humans have been around for a really long time, and the problem set is actually fairly limited. And right now, if you're solving a problem, if your startup wants to solve a problem, usually the problem exists and humans are trying to solve it some other way. And if they're going to switch to you, that thing that they're switching from is not going to be happy. And so I often tell founders, like, hey, almost every company that wins had to maim or kill an existing company. There's really no way to play this game nice. And that doesn't mean you have to be an asshole or be unethical. Like, I'm not saying it like that. I'm just saying, like, when Google releases, Google Workspace and competes with Microsoft loses customers. When Notion competes with Google loses customers. And so I think a lot of founders have to kind of think about it that way and think like, well, if that's the case, I can look at the market right now and understand what important problems are, because the biggest companies are solving the most important problems. And if I want to try to solve a really big problem, I can actually look around and see, oh man, maybe I'd have to knock off this person or that person when I solve the problem better. So that's my best attempt at a summary, but I really think it's helpful to kind of dig into the details. And you go to the YC website, you can see a list of all the best companies, and simple Google searching will give you a bunch of research. All right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great question. Next question here. Let's go Allison. Oh, it looks like let's check out. Here she comes. All right.
Hi, can you see me?
We can hear you. We cannot see you.
Okay, my question is, do you think AI products are becoming oversaturated? Like, the advancements in AI is like, marginal returns. So what's like the current best spaces to use AI now?
So I love this question. Before I answer it, explain to me why you believe AI products are becoming oversaturated.
Well, I've seen a lot of like startups that are just wrapping current technologies that are really expensive to build like themselves. So they just use like open AI like APIs
Mhm.
to build their company off of.
So let's do an analogy here. Would you say that companies that use AWS are just AWS wrappers?
Not technically, not necessarily.
Why? Why would you distinguish between the two so clearly?
Um, that's a good question.
So the reason why I'm pushing back is this is the perfect example of pop startup information. Like, this is the kind of thing you can read on Twitter. And like, it's the kind of thing that a seed investor would say, or like someone who's like a snarky, like older person would say. And it is an extremely common opinion from those folks that comes from, look at all these startups doing AI. I think once again, when we want to think about how
It's
markets work,
2:45.
yep,
Oh,
when we want to
my
think about how
bad.
markets work, a really good way for you to think about it is a new technology hits. So let's say the previous big technology would have been mobile. And then a whole bunch of startups and a whole bunch of large companies start building products to figure out what the opportunities that this new technology unlocks.
Mhm.
And so when you say oversaturated, it's this weird term because it assumes that like the opportunity has been consumed, Whereas like, I think the opportunity with AI has been not consumed at all. Like almost none of the products work really well yet. Almost none of the things that you can build with AI have been built yet. Now, certainly people have started companies, but they're not actually working yet. So just like in the early days of mobile phones, right? A whole bunch of people built apps, but it wasn't clear what was going to be the DoorDash, what was going to be the Instacart, what was going to be the Uber. That took years to flesh out.
Yeah.
And so I think that we're in that kind of phase right now. And I think a cynic's view is like, oh, it's too crowded, I should move on to the thing. Whereas like, I think another view is, this is the coolest new tool that we've had in over a decade. It's not clear the best way to use it. And this is an amazing opportunity for me to try to use this new tool to solve the existing problems in the world. And over the next 5 years, the winners and losers are going to be picked.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who are starting now will be declared winners and losers 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And then in terms of your second question, the best spaces to use AI in right now, well, I would come back and say, what were the best spaces to use mobile? I mean, it's an interesting question. Or if we even go one step back, what was the best spaces to use web applications? I would argue between mobile and web applications, almost every problem is being touched, right?
Yes.
And then if you look on the other side of it and you look at AWS and cloud computing, what spaces can benefit from cloud computing? Like almost every
Yeah.
company. So I think that like, if we were to take an even bigger step back, we would say like, what spaces benefit from the internet?
Everything.
Yeah. So I think you're seeing why there's so much excitement, because it's fairly rare. Like in my entire like startup lifetime, there's only been 3 of these moments. The first one was web apps when I was just getting started, right? Where it was like, oh
Mhm.
man, we can actually build applications and serve them in a browser, and we don't have to distribute them through Windows, right? The
Yeah.
second one was mobile, which all of you lived through. And this is the third. Each one of those produced companies that are literally changing the world right now.
Mm.
So one would argue running towards this is probably the only smart thing to do if you're doing a startup, right? Running towards using the new tool to figure out, can we solve any of the problems in the world better now that we have this new tool, is like the only smart thing. And if you're not using AI, well, markets are efficient. The other tools are old. Most likely the best solutions have already been created.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you so much. That was very insightful.
No worries. Great question. All right. Next question is from Daniel. This is a good one. I like this question a lot. Let's see him come up here. All right. Sorry, one sec. I'm just going to plug my laptop in here. It'll be a race between Daniel and I. Daniel can't join. Okay. Well, Daniel, you've got a good question, so I'm going to read it out loud and answer it. How much of my startup ideas should I share with others? What if I feel like my ideas would be stolen? So this is an extremely common concern, and I want to be the one that tells you, you should not be worried about this at all. The fun thing about software companies is that software companies are literally 200% about execution. As a YC partner, we receive about 30,000 applications every batch. And I have seen almost every startup idea that exists. And what's so interesting is I think that a lot of people have this misconception of the value of ideas in our software world. So I'll give an example. If you know the location of a gold mine, that information is incredibly valuable. Like if you know where gold is in the ground and no one else knows, right? That information is incredibly valuable. That's akin, and in those types of businesses, ideas are very, very valuable. Software businesses are the exact opposite thing. If when Facebook was first being built, you thought, oh man, social networks, that's a great idea. So did everyone else. There were 50 social networks launched right around Facebook. Just not valuable at all. The reason why Facebook won is they out-executed everyone else. So on the flip side, if you think about a startup as generating a movement, right? You need your users to be excited about you. You need employees to be excited about you. You need investors to be excited about you. How can you start a movement silently? It's impossible. So the counterintuitive thing here is that like you should be talking about your idea to everyone. No one is going to steal your idea. They want to work on their own ideas. And if they do steal their idea, your idea, how are they going to execute it better than you? But the more people you talk about with you talk to your idea with, the more you learn, the more you can rally people to work with you or to try your product. So this is like a really big misconception, right? Like you might be talking to lawyers or random other business people who are like, oh, no, like your ideas are valuable. No, your execution is valuable. You should be telling as many people as possible what you want to work on. All right, next question. Let's go through this. Where I did the wrapper one. Pranjal, you've got a good question about mentors here. Well, let's see if you can come up on stage. This is funny because this is a test of everyone's internet and computer skills here. Can you get on stage? Close. So close. And then why don't I queue up a couple other people so that you can be waiting. So after Pranjal, we're going to do Jaden. We'll do Kevin. And we'll do Lighten. So we can queue those folks up. All right. So Pranjal can't get on stage. Issues with the internets, maybe. Let's go to this question. How can I get someone to mentor me? Oh, maybe he's here. Looks like he's close to being here. Okay. Turn on your mic and there we go. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. All right, sorry about that. I had some technical difficulty, but my question is, say I have like a really cost-effective business idea, right? And I don't necessarily need a lot of money, but I need guys on that.
Looks like not good internet. Okay, I got the gist of my idea of the question here, and it's up on the screen. I think too many founders are looking for mentors. I think mentors, I'll be controversial. I think mentors are bullshit in the startup world, and I'll explain why. I think that the concept of mentors is usually introduced to founders when it comes to what I like to call East Coast jobs. So East Coast jobs, and I'm speaking about America here, are these jobs where like you have to join a large organization and work your way up for like a large number of years. And to work your way up in this organization, you actually have to learn how that organization works. How do people get rewarded? How do they get promoted? How do you avoid getting fired? Like, I think that each company is slightly different, and those best practices to succeed inside of that organization, they have nothing to do with the real world, right? They have nothing to do with whether you're helping customers or not, or whether the company's making more money or not. They're part of the culture of that company. And I think that a mentor is really great at guiding you through that kind of culture, because typically they're further ahead of you in their careers and they've worked their way up. So if you want to get a job at Google and you're thinking, hey, in 15 years, I want to manage a team of 1,000 people at Google, it would make sense to get a mentor who is a manager and seek their advice. I think in the startup world, people want something similar. I want a mentor to help me figure out how to get my startup to work. Now, this is the tricky thing. Whereas the person who's now managing 1,000 people at Google can tell you how to do it, tell you how others did it, and probably give you some pretty good advice on how to do it yourself. I would argue there's almost no one who can tell you how to win in startups. There's almost no one who can tell you what your users want other than your users. There's almost no one who can tell you how to build it because it hasn't been built yet. So when you think about this mentor character, this kind of all-knowing, all-seeing kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi, they don't exist. Now, can every startup founder who's successful point out some people who helped them along the way? Of course. But this idea that there was this one person who kind of was the sage and they could kind of like become a master by studying under their tutelage, complete bullshit. I will tell you that the people that you're most likely going to learn the most from when building your startup are your users, your peers, other startup founders, and your employees. That's where the knowledge comes from. And I'll tell you, the biggest group of users who can give you knowledge are the people who really love your product and the people who really hate your product. And so the last note I will give you is that most of the startup advice that I deliver during YC is written and is already online. So if you are interested in actually doing some searching, right? There's a product called the YC Library. There's the YC videos on YouTube. You can get all of the basic startup advice for free right now. You don't need a mentor to have that. So great question. Next up, Jaden, you've got like 16 questions in here. So we'll see which one we pick. How do I, let's see. How do I find a business idea? That's a great one to start. All right.
Hey,
Go ahead,
can you hear
sir.
me?
Yes.
Yes. Hey, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's really great to meet you. So for some context about myself, I'm a second year at Georgia Tech,
Okay.
and I'm really interested in building like specifically like B2B startups right now.
Yep.
But one thing is as like a college student, I don't have a lot of experience or like domain expertise, especially with other businesses or like other more niche areas. So one question was like, how exactly would I go about finding those business ideas? And then kind of like as an extension, like since I would also probably be doing like interviews or like trying to talk to other like business owners, what is the best way to like reach out and contact them because like without getting ghosted?
So I love this question. Why do you believe you should be working on a B2B idea?
So I've tried. So in the past, like I've tried to,
1
like
second.
I'm
That question, I want you to take 10 seconds and really think.
okay,
And then I want
okay,
you to answer it in one sentence.
okay.
Why should you be working on a B2B startup idea?
So I guess like should I just? I'll just okay. I'll just go. So I think I have identified a problem in like at a so okay. I'm so nervous. I'm sorry. So
You only have one sentence to answer this question.
Okay,
Long
okay. So
to
I
be-
think I've identified a problem with like in it's specifically it's like a moving trucking like company, like they handle like I guess not for the truckers. I guess they
Now you're going way long. Okay,
okay, I'm
here's what I
I'm
would
so
say.
sorry.
I would say this. I think a lot of people, this is another piece of kind of pop startup advice.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people have been told that consumer is dead and B2B is the only thing that wins. And I think that you should be really careful because like by the time business knowledge makes it to students, it's probably pretty old.
Mhm.
And I would say that if we go back to cycles, one of the things that I've noticed is that consumer products tend to monopoly faster than B2B products. And the consumer world just moves faster. So if you think about in mobile, right? Mobile, iPhone comes out 08, 09. By 10, apps are really hitting hard. But like probably by 2015, all the consumer winners exist, right? Instagram's out there, Snapchat's out there, Uber's out there, Lyft's out there, so on and so forth, right? And then over that period of time, how many new consumer winners have happened since 2015? I think by that time, even ByteDance was out there. So if we try to kind of take a step back, it seems to me that when you're early in a technology cycle, there are a lot of consumer opportunities and a lot of B2B opportunities. And it seems like the consumer opportunities tend to get soaked up faster, and the B2B opportunities tend to take longer to be exploited. And I think that's just because for consumers, switching to a different product is actually pretty fast. Right? You don't have to ask anyone, you don't have to do anything, you have to get any approvals, right? Whereas and oftentimes you don't really sign up for products that and sign a contract for 10 years. Whereas in the business world, right, there's approvals, there's process, there's long-term contracts. So it can take longer for technology change to effectively produce solutions in the business world. So that was a long way of saying you should probably work on ideas where you experience the problem personally. And if those are consumer problems, because hey, you're a young person and you're experiencing more consumer problems than B2B problems, work on something in consumer, right? This is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people are flocking to startups right now is because we're in this new tech cycle and like there are consumer opportunities. I think one of the reasons why a lot of young people were kind of shying away from startups 5 years ago was that like there weren't a lot of consumer opportunities and a lot of them didn't have experience. They hadn't personally experienced business problems. I would say that if you are super excited about doing a B2B company, the best place to experience business problems is going to work at a company, right? Like I do believe this whole like randomly doing research in random areas is like bullshit. I think that like, hey, if you are really excited about trucking, go work in a trucking startup and you'll learn what all the problems are and you'll figure out if that's what you want to do. And then here's the last note I want to leave you. And this is like kind of like it can be perceived negatively, but it's real world, right? So
Mhm.
one of the things we talk about a lot at YC is founder market fit. So basically, like, why are you uniquely able to exploit this opportunity? Now, every founder and every team in YC has software developers, and they all are good. So
Mhm.
being able to write code is not a unique ability. Now, there was this one company that sold to Amazon for I think $700 million called PillPack. And this was a company that basically allows you to bundle all of your prescriptions into one nice little packet. And you basically open the packet, take all the pills in it that day, and you've taken all your prescriptions. For young people, probably not very relevant. For older folks that might have 4, 5, 6 prescriptions, instead of open up all those bottles, oh, I forgot one, oh, I ran out, PillPack, all good. Now, I talked to the founder of PillPack, and I was like, tell me your history. And let me explain to you what founder problem or founder market fit looks like. He said, well, I grew up and my dad was a pharmacist. And I was like, interesting. And during high school, to make money, I would drive around and deliver prescriptions to my dad's patients. Huh, okay. And my dad realized that if he bundled the prescriptions in little packages, then it'd be a lot easier than giving people these what do you call it? These individual bottles. So his dad, when he was growing up, invented this pill pack thing and was just distributing it like a normal pharmacist. Then he goes to college and what do you call it? Is a CS major and learns to code. So here's this guy who's starting a like pill delivery company, and his dad was a pharmacist. He delivered the pills. He saw these packs worked, and he knew how to code. Do you want to compete against that guy? So I think that like if you can find something where you would bring some of those advantages, then people don't want to compete against you. And I think that like too often founders are like, oh, let me explore some green field and like try to learn about a business from scratch or learn about a problem from scratch. And like remember, like if you're learning from scratch, you're competing against the pill pack guy. It's trickier.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you're building something for yourself, you probably already understand the problem pretty well, at least as a consumer.
Mhm.
Now you're starting to get the advantages of the pill pack guy. All right. Great question. Let's bring up Kevin next. And then after that, let's do Lighten and Lokesh. All right, Kevin.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Great to meet you. And thanks for the time. If you have one or a few, I wanted to ask, what are some of the top traits you look for in founders? And something that maybe is not the most like basic that everyone says, you know, you just have to be hardworking and whatever the case. Is there anything specific you look for?
Yes. So I think this is not said enough. I think founders overemphasize ideas and underemphasize technical skills. And so I think that so often I'll see a YC application where there isn't a full-time software developer as a founder, or they're like outsourcing development, or it's just a couple business guys who are like, oh, software is not that important. And when I read those applications, I laugh. I'm like, you are fucked. Like, I will fund an engineer over a non-engineer every day of the week. And so I think that's well known, but I don't think it's understood well enough. Second, I meet a lot of students who studied software development in school, but don't want to write code in their startup. And I'm like, well, we're in the software world. If you don't like writing code, then maybe you should, I don't know, get a job at a newspaper or something. Like, why are you in this world, right? So that's the second thing, right? I would say the third thing, and founders kind of mess this up so much, is I feel like they spend more time on their deck and their pitch and like the things that they think investors want to hear. And they spend less time just fucking doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Like a great trait for a founder that is lesser known is instead of saying, hey, fund me and I'll build this thing,
Build the thing.
build the prototype. And like, what's interesting is that if the prototype is good, your resume matters less. Where you went to school, where you worked, all of those things are us trying to guess at can you build something. You can cut through all that bullshit by just building something that looks good. And like, it doesn't have to have a ton of users, but like every 10 years, the cost of building things basically drops by 10x, right? Like, how hard is it to build something nowadays? You can get free credits on AWS, you can get free credit. Like, it's basically free if you're a software engineer. So I would say like that is the thing that like cuts through everything else. If we can try your product and it does the thing that you say you want to do, we're like, great. How de-risked is this?
Right.
person can build stuff. They have some taste in design. It actually does the thing they say they want to do. And then when we're reading what you want to do, if we have the product next to us, it's like, boom, that's amazing. So
Right.
I don't think I'd said anything that's like mind blowing, but you'd be shocked at how much time people spend doing surveys, building decks,
Yeah.
getting advisors, incorporating, talking to lawyers. I met a founder yesterday who was like, "Oh, I can't launch because I don't have a terms of service." I'm like, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
who cares? Get something out there.
Cool.
All right.
Can I ask one quick follow-up?
Sure, go ahead.
You said how it's so easy to build stuff these days. Do you think the moat for companies has kind of switched just to execution and not really on the tech itself? Or kind of like, how
Well,
do you see the landscape
don't take
shifting?
me out of context. I think building a prototype has never been easier, right?
Mhm.
Not building a whole
Right.
product and a whole company, right?
Gotcha.
I think building a prototype has never been easier. I think that competitive advantages are tricky. I'll say this. You would be surprised how many startups say their product does X, and then when you try the product, it doesn't do X.
Doesn't do X.
And
Yeah.
it's just like, we can't even tell if X is a good idea because you didn't even get it to fucking do X. So like maybe
Right.
X would be amazing, maybe X wouldn't be amazing. Like it was great. I was seeing a product the other day that helped people buy secondhand clothes and secondhand
Mhm.
like, and I was like, all right, let's see. Like I want to buy like year 2000 Jordans. We typed it
Yeah.
in, nothing showed up that had anything to do with year 2000 Jordans. I'm just like, well,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but can you make Jordans at least appear or not appear? There are not,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
can you actually make it work? So often founders like realize how hard it is to make something work, and then they kind of pivot to working on other things instead of just getting their product to work. And like, hey, if it doesn't work in the widest sense, I would have been fine if the founder said, hey, it's only going to work for furniture, or it's only going to work for watches, or who cares? Narrow the problem, but get it to work.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay.
best advice. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael.
Lighten, why don't you come up, and then in the queue, let's see who else we got here. This is working better than I expected. Michael, thanks for your help in the background here, making this all happen. And then let's get Diego in
Alright.
the queue as well. All right, Lighten, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is, so just for context, I'm an international student from Zimbabwe. So when I came to the USA, I realized that families in the diaspora, they're having a hard time teaching their kids like languages from back home. So I started like working on a little application to like teach. So far I'm like only working on one application for one language.
Yes.
And so I know that there's some sort of like demand for that, and it's now like a small project of mine. But then the question is, how can I get like that small project to become bigger? And I know like Duolingo is moving fast, but then they're only like taking the larger languages from like Africa and stuff like that. So I'm trying to like move faster than Duolingo, if I may say.
So I think this is a great question. I think that like if I were to try to generalize it for everyone, I think that there's a starting point that a lot of investors use when trying to figure out whether a company can or a startup can be big or not, that I don't think is exactly wrong. And I think that starting point is, does a huge company exist in this space? Now, you might think Duolingo is huge. I don't. I think Duolingo is small. I think you probably know this too. I don't think Duolingo is a language learning app. How many people who use Duolingo a year later can they speak the fucking language? I think Duolingo is like a game. Duolingo reminds me of like NPR. It's like you can listen to a really bad podcast where you're not learning anything, or you can like listen to NPR and kind of think you're learning something. But like, are you really learning, or are you just kind of like, kind of a little bit learning? And I feel like Duolingo is kind of like, well, I could play a game that would make me embarrassed that I'm just wasting my time. Like I could just play League of Legends all day, or I could play Duolingo and like at least I feel a little better about myself. I think that's Duolingo. I think the real business in language learning, unfortunately, are language schools. I think most people learn languages in two places, one at home and two in language school. I think no language schools have gotten huge. So now we got this problem. You want to teach people niche languages, but like there's no school that even teaches people English that makes billions of dollars a year. So as a VC, I'm thinking, I don't know that this language thing is something that software can really help. If it hasn't produced $1 billion company and software has been around for 50 years, why would it produce one now? And when I say $1 billion company, I mean $1 billion in revenue that actually teaches languages, that's actually software. So I think that's the tricky bit. If I go one step deeper, oftentimes software wins when it makes something 10x easier. I think one of the reasons why edtech has never worked as a space is that no one's figured out how to teach you anything in 10x less time or 10x less effort. And it's funny because like I remember when Khan Academy came out and people were like, boom, this is it. Like if you put all curriculum online, game on, you've won. And all curriculum's online now, right?
Yeah.
Has education changed? So I think anyone who wants to create an ed tech company, and I would put language in there, if they think they want to make it into $1 billion company, the big trick they need to figure out is how do you reduce the effort? And I think the scary truth is that the thing that's reducing the effort for language learning isn't even language learning. It's translation, right? Like you can literally translate any website into any language on your phone. You can do live translation, right? With your AirPods, you can do translation. In a world where translation is ubiquitous, do people need to learn languages as much? They might want to. You know, if I'm a parent and my kid doesn't speak my language, I might want to. But does that kid really get an advantage? I don't know. So anyways, great question. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It just means that's the game we're playing. That's the game you decide to play, right? Like,
Yeah.
you should know how hard it is.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's look at more Q&A here. And Diego's coming up. Oh, I love this. Okay. Saba, S-A-B-A-H, can go after Diego. But next is Diego. Okay.
Nice.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Michael. So my name is Diego. I'm studying computer science at UNC Charlotte.
Yes.
And I was actually thinking, kind of like iterating, if I could ask you a question that you would really have like the most depth about. And I came down to thinking that you've seen founders, I'm sure, just trying to connect with customers. You kept iterating on like that your customers know, like your customers will be the best people to talk to.
Yes.
So I was going to ask you, like, what do you think works well when founders are trying to connect with customers?
So here's the fun thing. I'm going to tell you what doesn't work well. So I would say most founders aren't really trying to connect with customers at all. I would say most founders are trying to get customers to use their product because of the benefit to the founder, not because of the benefit to the customer. Most founders I meet, they're thinking to themselves, if I get these users, I'll be able to raise funding, and be able to raise funding, I'll be able to hire people. And if I can hire people and raise funding and these users pay me, I can build more product. And everything is me, 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 me. Here's what I want to do. And these customers are just kind of, you know, helping me. When people think that way, they do things like, let me send a non-personalized LinkedIn message to 100 people. Hey, like I'm doing something in the education space and I see you're a teacher. Can you get on the phone with me for an hour and we could talk about like how I can do X, Y, and Z? Doesn't that sound like a me message? How am I helping the customer? So I would say that like that mindset is what really, really fucks founders. That's number one. Here's the second mindset. If you can write code, the easiest way you can think about building a company is talk to customer, get a list of features they want, build those features and win. Now, if that algorithm worked, YC would be producing so many billion-dollar companies, right? We only fund people who can, teams that have software developers on them. And like, they're all smart people and they can get customers on the phone. Why don't all the products win? Here's the screwed up thing. Customers don't know what they want. Customers don't know what can be built. AI is new. How does a customer know what you can do with AI and what you can't? Now, here's like a crazy kind of blast from the past, right? Everyone's used to influencers now and people making money by being influencers. But like 15 years ago, that didn't exist. When you put video or streamed live to some UGC site like us or YouTube, you didn't make any money. And so when we were getting started with Twitch, we had no idea people wanted to make money streaming. Now, doesn't that sound dumb? Like saying that out loud now, I sound like an idiot, right? Like, oh, people wanted to stream for 8 hours and not make money just for fun. But that was what everyone believed back then, because how could you make money? There were no ads online. No one would pay to watch someone stream. So because the streamers themselves didn't think that they could make money, they never asked. They asked for a higher video quality or random other features. And we had to kind of dig out of them the idea that they hated their jobs. They loved streaming. And if they could pay their rent, they would stream all day. We didn't know that. They barely knew it. But after figuring that out, we started realizing our unique insight is Twitch, which is like, if we can get streamers paid, we got something. If we can get the best streamers, the most popular streamers paid so they can do this full time, they will produce content that will attract millions of viewers. And that was our insight. It took us 5 years. So the two things not to do. One, don't be selfish. Businesses are selfless. They serve the customer and then get rewarded for it. So actually, in all of your communication interactive with prospective customers, you should be selfless. You should be willing to give before you receive. And then number two, trying to get a customer to give you a list of features to build and building them, it's like an absolute zero up, like not going to work. The best founders, when talking to customers, try to figure out what the customer is trying to accomplish, what they want to do in their life, what they want to do with their time. And they want to try to understand the customer's problem. After you understand the customer's problem, it's your job to figure out how to solve it. When you outsource the feature list to your customers, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Not their job to figure out the features. All right. That's a great question. How are we doing on time? Oh, wow. Time flew. Okay. I think this will be the last one. Saba, you ready to go? I feel like this is going to be my most disappointing answer, so I'm excited for it.
Hi,
Okay.
Michael. Nice meeting you.
Great to meet you. Go ahead.
So my question was, I noticed that most startups, or like the startup culture, is on the West Coast, and I was wondering if there were any opportunities for us East Coasters or people that might want to work remotely.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, so there is oil in Texas, and you love drilling for fucking oil. You love it. You're an oil Barris. Oil is your game, but you don't want to live in Texas. You don't like Texas. Michael, can you help me find the oil in New Jersey? And then this is when Michael thinks, well, do you like Texas or do you like New Jersey? I mean, do you like oil or do you like New Jersey? And you're like, well, but I like both. But I want to be comfortable. I prefer to, I want to be in the oil business, but I prefer to, oh, you prefer. So what about the person you're competing against that just wants to be in the oil business? They win. Now, let me say it another way. Isn't it cool you live in a country where there's oil and you can move there and you can get it? There are lots of countries where there's no fucking oil at all. Where to drill oil, you got to go and get a passport, and then you got to get citizenship somewhere else, and then you have to start a business there, and then maybe that country doesn't like foreigners starting businesses, so maybe you don't speak the language. Oh, you live in a country with oil, and all you have to do is move to a different state? You see where I'm going with this?
Fair point. Fair point.
And so this is, I think, the most important thing. I think that people think about startups as a career versus a lifestyle. And when you think about a career in a job at Google, you can balance the various things you want. I want a dog. I want to live in the suburbs. I want to work at this job. And what a company does for you is basically de-risks you and allows you to kind of express yourself in these multiple ways. But when you start a company, it's your whole life. You sacrifice or have to be willing to sacrifice almost everything. I think a much better analogy here is sports. Imagine if you had a kid and they said, I want to be the next Michael Jordan, but I really only want to practice an hour a day. You'd be like, well, it was already probably not going to happen before you said I want to practice an hour a day. Now it definitely going to happen, like zero. And I think that like when people think about sports, there's so many more public examples of how much you have to sacrifice. It's like, oh, you see that woman win the gold medal, but you know, when she goes home, she really she does hurdles every day for 6 hours a day. Like that's her whole life is running hurdles. And it's not surprising she's the best at the world at it. She's willing to sacrifice the most for it. When you're a startup founder and you win, you're the best in the world at something. What are you willing to sacrifice to be the best in the world?
Right.
And I will say this, it's a lot easier for young people to sacrifice stuff than older people. Y'all just have a lot less stuff going on. Most of you, I assume, don't have mortgages. Most of you, I assume, don't have families. Most of you, I assume, you don't have to take care of they're still relatively young. Most of you, when looking, if you were to kind of fast forward 20 years, this moment is the moment where you have the least external obligations. So you have the biggest opportunity to go all in on something. And one of the reasons why younger people on average do more startups is because of that. The other thing is that almost all of you have your entire 20s to get really good at something, and you get really good at something when you're doing a company in that space. We were not good at doing live video when we started the company. We knew nothing about live video. But man, we learned under fire, and you learn so much more under fire. So I would tell people, it's funny because I always say, hey, I used oil in this example, but I usually use mining. And I'm like, the Bay Area is a mining town. If you want to be in the mining business, move to the mining town. If you want to go on vacation, do not come to the mining town. If you want to have fun, do not come to the mining town. If you want arts and culture, don't come to the mining town. Or if you want those things, live in the mining town and travel to those things, right? When I want to go see a Broadway play, when I wanted to go see Hamilton from the original cast, you know what I did? I got on a freaking plane. It was great. And then I came back and I kept working. You could do that. It's a little harder with family and so on and so forth, but you can do that. And I think it's a much better way of thinking about this than like, oh, I can have it all. Like, oh, I can have the balance. Balance is for employees. Balance is for employees. All right, I think we're at time. These are great
Thank
questions.
you.
And hey, I'm so happy everyone got their camera going. I know we tried a new little format here. I think it worked out pretty well. My email address is michael at ycombinator.com. You can email me. There's no secretary. I read every one of my emails. Whether I reply is based on how good your email is. But you should know I read every email. And if you're smart, you will send emails with read receipts. And so like you will see if I read your email. The last thing I'll say is that you do not need to email me to apply to YC. You do not need to know anyone at YC to apply to YC. The only thing you have to do to apply to YC is fill out an application. And everyone who does YC fills out an application. It's super easy. It's super simple. If you can't find where the application is, trust Google. It will help you out.
For sure.
All right, Anthony, thank you so much.
Michael, thank you so much for this thought-provoking conversation. The students, if you can see the chat, I'm pretty sure you can. They have loved this session tremendously. So thank you so much for that. For the students, thank you all so much. Please show Michael your appreciation in the chat. We really, really appreciate this. Also, make sure that you fill out the survey here that we just dropped. Make sure you tell us what you liked about the session and X, Y, and Z. Also, be sure to drop by the different lounges where some of our presenters will be hanging out, and also the company booth time when it is open. So again, Michael, we thank you so much, but we're going to show a brief video from our host, Bobby D.
See y'all later.
We will now be transitioning into the open network session. Let me give you some information here. It says that you can access the networking lounge to build connections. Now remember, network, it will be your net worth going forward. Remember that, Jim. Or you can visit the company's booths to learn more about the organizations joining us here at the summit. And don't forget to drop your resume when you go visit them too. Thank you so much. We'll see you in a little bit.